Canada's labour market continues to churn out jobs, providing momentum for a growing consensus among economists who expect a small rate hike on Wednesday. Now, all 6 of Canada's biggest commercial banks expect a 0.25 percentage point increase to the Bank of Canada's key interest rate. The latest snapshot of the expanding job market shows the creation of 60,000 positions in June, even as the jobless rate ticked higher. That's because immigration increased the size of the job market and also pushed up the number of people looking for a job. Joining me to discuss is Nate Thooft with Manulife Investment Management. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Nate, we are finally seeing signs that the Canadian economy is slowing. Inflation has eased, the job market's still strong, but wage growth has slowed. Could we achieve that elusive soft landing and dodge a recession?
I mean, there's a theoretical reason that you could, but I think the risk is still pretty high that we do see a period of outright recession or simply slow growth. And the reality is there isn't much difference between that. There's still going to be a level of pain felt by a lot of consumers and a lot of the general public based on the higher rates that we've seen the central bank raise over the last year or so. And the simple reality is a lot of that pain is probably still yet to come in the markets.
Okay, so not the greatest news there. The Bank of Canada's next interest rate announcement is Wednesday. Money markets are betting on a 25 basis point increase. Of all the economists I've interviewed this week, only one expects our central bank to pause. What do you see in your crystal ball?
Unfortunately, our base case is we too do see a 25 basis point hike. Now, whether it's the right thing to do or not is a question, because as I said earlier, there's a lot of the increase in rates that has still yet to be felt by the markets and the overall economy. There's a big lag, and the 0.25 point probably doesn't mean a lot in the grand scheme of things because it's just another 25 basis points on the 400 to 500 they've already raised. But, it is something that they're sticking to the theme that they must squash inflation, and their rhetoric has been very clear that they're focused on that, and therefore we do expect another 0.25 point this coming week.
Okay, and the Bank of Canada, we know it started its aggressive rate hiking cycle last March. Historically, it takes about 18 months for increases to be fully felt throughout the economy. We are seeing signs that they're working, but in many ways, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm thinking of those mortgages that will be up for renewal. Is there a danger in keeping interest rates at the highest levels we've seen in a generation?
There's an absolute danger, and I think that's the balancing act that the federal government as well as the central bank is going to have to do relative to the impacts to the economy. We know there's a lot more to come through from these rate hikes that we haven't seen in everyday life, and the mortgage area is one in particular in Canada that's quite unique relative to other geographies around the globe, and that pain is still to come in many cases. But at the same time, they're focused on the broader inflation story. And inflation is a complex topic. There's lots of areas of inflation that are still arguably running too strong beyond just the idea that your interest rate costs and your mortgage costs are going up. They're looking at the whole picture of inflation, and there is more work to do to get to the ballpark that they're focused on.
Yeah, not a ton of time left, but I do want to ask you, so we know interest rates are the tool that the Bank of Canada has to tackle inflation, but there are other factors that could dampen inflation and economic growth. For example, a prolonged strike at BC ports. Also, immigration tends to have a dampening effect on wages and inflation. How much of an impact do you think those internal factors can have?
Oh, there's a lot of impacts. Inflation is a very complex story because there are a lot of drivers of inflation that are still at play. At the same time, some of those drivers are starting to see a level of alleviation, such as supply chain issues. But at the same time, as you noted, there's a lot of external factors that are still at play. So what the central bank is doing is only one component of the fight against inflation. And in many cases, their fight against inflation doesn't actually solve all the inflation story. And so there is a multifaceted approach here that has to be taken to truly solve the challenge of controlling inflation in the coming years.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. That was Nate Thooft of Manulife Investment Management. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.